That's correct.
There we go. You want to introduce me?
Yes. Good evening, everybody. This is the sixth of our 7 CERT refresher courses. Tonight, Gordon Dowdy is going to be talking to us about disaster psychology. Gordon, take it away.
Thank you, Jim. So before we get into actual disaster psychology, I want to just make a quick comment about the pandemic. And during the last year, we've all gone through quite a bit. And our families have been impacted. We may or may not have lost loved ones or friends, but our lives have changed quite a bit. And now that we're getting close, to being able to resume life somewhat is normal. It may not necessarily be the same as it was back in 2018. But we're almost there. And so I came across a saying the other day that I thought might be appropriate. And it actually can work that way for CERT as well in a CERT environment. And that is one of the things to think about as we come out of this and what we want to do with our lives going forward. So the quote I heard was, make a plan and plan to make it. And so it really resonated with me, and I just wanted to share that. And because I think it's some good wisdom for us going forward to think about what is our life going to be like? What do we want it to be like? And organize that and then go do it. So with that, I will get on to tonight's presentation. As always, one of the first slides we have is to take a look at doing the greatest good for the greatest number, hope for the best, plan for the worst, and always have personal safety as our #1 priority and wear the appropriate CERT gear. So our unit objective is to describe the disaster and post-disaster emotional environment for our victims and rescuers. Remembering too that we as rescuers are victims as well. Describe the steps that a rescuer can take to relieve their own stress and that of disaster survivors. And we'll talk about disaster survivors first and then go into us CERT members. One of the things that I want to relay is the fact that physical trauma and psychological trauma are not mutually exclusive. They come together. The psychological trauma is really a behavioral state that results from either severe emotional stress or physical injury. And someone experiencing a loss may also experience physical trauma along with that. I myself, in 2003, was diagnosed with cancer. And as I was going through that process, I certainly had some physical elements that were going on in changing my life. Rapid weight loss. I actually had to borrow clothes from my son and shuffling around. But it also affected me psychologically. I had this feeling, you have this overall arching feeling, am I going to die? You don't feel like you're in control. You're there. And certainly once you start medication, you don't feel like you're in control at all. So that is just an example of something where some physical trauma can affect us psychologically. So phases of a crisis. And this is, kind of for both us as CERT members and for the general public. But initially, we may show no emotion. A victim may show no emotion. Then there's this inventory stage where, you know, damages damage is going to be excess. People will be looking at their houses, what their maybe damage and loss might be there. Locate other family members that may be survivors or maybe not. Rescuers, us, you know, survivors tend to cooperate with us quite readily when we show up, you know, in our green vest and hard hats and say, we're CERT here to help. And, you know, for those that need it, we may do a quick RPM. And after we've sized up the house. But then it's not uncommon later on for survivors to show some hostility towards us. And that hostility is caused because they want to blame someone or assign fault, or they're having difficulty processing what has happened. You know, we're all too quick to blame the other person. This happened because someone else did something or didn't do something. So it's not uncommon during a period of time that that survivor may actually somehow become a little hostile towards us. And they could be upset because they've lost a loved one, or they have a loved one that has been injured and needs to go to the hospital, or their house has severe damage and maybe considered a total loss. So some of these psychological symptoms that we may come across with our victims, and that they could be irritable, they could be angry, self-blame or blaming others. We kind of just touched on that. Fear of a reoccurrence. You know, the worry about, am I going to have any, if it's an earthquake, aftershocks. Feeling numb, overwhelmed, obviously. Helpless. Not uncommon when things happen and we're not in control, that we can feel very helpless. Mood swings, sadness, depression, grief, denial. And then there could be some relationship conflicts, marital discord. It's not uncommon when there's some kind of tragic event that has happened that it affects people differently. I unfortunately lost my daughter, Amanda. And one of the first things that my wife, my son, and I agreed to after that loss was that we were going to respect the different ways that we would grieve, because I know my son would grieve differently than I would, and I know my wife would grieve differently. And so by being a little proactive and recognizing the fact that people grieve differently, that they've had different experiences, and honor that is a very powerful thing that can be a real positive out of some of these negative psychological symptoms. So then we're going to take a look at some mediating factors that also could affect a survivor. You know, whether or not they've had prior experience with a similar event. You know, maybe they were impacted during Loma Prieta or the Napa earthquake. The intensity of disruption, you know, how severe was it? You know, did they have some serious damage to their household? Look out around their neighborhood and see more damage. Their feelings, you know, individual feelings about the event. This kind of goes back to, we all process things differently. Emotional strength of the individual. You know, that's just going to vary on the individual. And then length of time since the event. You know, we all know that over time, time does have a tendency to heal. But if we're there and it's only a few hours, a few days, it's going to affect people differently. So let's take a look now at stabilizing an individual. You know, what are some of the things that we can do that will go ahead and help them? You know, first of all, assess the survivor for injury and shock. You know, we're going to go in and do RPMs, you know, on people. Part of that RPM is we're going to check the mental status, and that really means talking to them. You know, can we have some kind of discussion? We want to get the uninjured people involved in helping. And, you know, these could be the green people. The benefit of getting them involved and helping us is it gives them something to do. It makes them feel valued. And as we go through, let's say, a house, and we have a couple people that was splinted or bandaged, and we have, you know, a neighbor or another family member that's uninjured, that might be able to take these people to the hospital, let's say if they had a broken arm or something like that. So they actually can be quite an asset for CERT. We have to keep an eye on them and make sure that, you know, they don't get caught up in some emotional feelings about the incident itself. We want to provide support through listening, empathizing, and help survivors connect with some of those support systems, which may be family members, it could be clergy, could be organizations, could be the senior center, all of these things to help them. And we can suggest those types of things that would help most likely in the long run. So how do we become an empathetic listener? First thing we have to do is to put ourselves in the speaker's shoe when we're talking to these people. We want to listen for meaning, just not words. What are they really saying? You know, we want to take a look at the nonverbal communication. One way to show them that we're listening to them is to paraphrase what they're saying. And this can be a very valuable tool, but we also have to be cautious of, we still want to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So it would be easy to get drawn into conversations and listening to somebody. And we all know that when we have something that we're faced with that we're not certain, one way of bringing about some calm or bringing about some way of recovering is through conversation, just that talk. But we have to be very careful that we don't get wrapped up and spend too much time and not helping others that may need it. So there's certain things that we don't want to say. And I'm going to give you a second to take a look at this slide. And I'll just hit on a few. You know, if they're upset, the last thing we want to say is don't cry. You know, wanting to blame someone else, we don't want to say it's God's will. You know, we don't want to say anything that's going to make this person feel like we really didn't listen. We're discounting how they're feeling. We want to be supportive. And we can say things like, you know, these are normal reactions, you know, to a disaster. You know, I just talked to somebody down the street that was feeling very similar. You know, it's understandable how you feel. You know, as you connect with others, be it, again, support group, family members, you may find that they've experienced some of the same feelings. You know, sometimes people, when someone else in the family maybe was injured, they want to take on saying, well, it was my fault. You know, it's not their fault that the earthquake happened or the fire happened. You know, they didn't plan it. So, things may never be the same, but you may find things from this experience that can help you help others. I'm a little cautious on that. Things honestly may not be the same, never be the same. But we have to watch for the right time to say something like that particular sentence, so that we're not giving them false hope. Okay. So let's talk about us, rescuer psychological trauma. Remembering that as rescuers, we're also survivors. And things that will affect us as it will affect other survivors is any personal losses that you've had. Could be back in time, quite honestly, you may be working in your neighborhood, working, with people that if you're on a search and rescue team, you're going to, go out, help your neighbors and friends, coworkers, those that have been injured. And you may not feel safe and secure yourself. You underwent this earthquake, you felt it. Certainly you came out, you were okay, your family members were okay, your house was okay. You checked on a few neighbors, maybe some seniors, and then you went to the incident command post to report there. But then there's an earthquake aftershock. And once again, all these feelings are going to rise to the surface again. And you may not feel safe and secure. And if that's it, you need to let other people know as well. Okay? Because remember, you're a victim and we're there to help our victims. Let's talk about it, what it might do to our body, depending on how we are. Again, this psychological and physiological differences, they aren't mutually exclusive. So we may actually have periods of hyperactivity, some of this after an event. You may not be able to sleep, fatigue. You may have thoughts that are reoccurring. And, there's all kinds of loss of appetite, headaches, chest pain. All of these things may happen, hopefully not, but you may be impacted by all of these things, and how do you address these things? We use the word size up quite a bit, and you need to go through and personally size yourself up. What am I feeling? And you need to also, with that, reach out and talk to others, talk to family members. It's important, and I'll say it again a little later, that as you're going through these things that you've experienced, you may have seen some horrific things, experience that. You may not be one of those people that likes the sight of blood, but you may see it, and so some of these things are going to physically affect you, and you need to let family members, friends, and others know that you're having some difficulty. And immediately you need to, if it happens when you're out with your search and rescue team, you need to let your team lead know and other members there. Vicarious trauma, or it can also be called compassion fatigue. And this is a process, and we want to avoid over-identifying with survivors' grief and trauma itself. We may have enough of our own. Although you're a survivor of the event, as I said earlier, you certainly can provide care and empathy to the survivors, but you have a responsibility again, to provide support for the greatest number of people. Team well-being. So one of the things that drew me to CERT was the fact that we worked in teams. And next week, I'm going to talk about the CERT organization, and we'll talk about teams. But, you know, we're part of a team. It doesn't matter if you're at the incident command post in medical or logistics, operations, you know, you're helping with incident command, you know, you're part of a team. And if you're in search and rescue, you know, you're part of a team. You'll have a team leader. And that team leader, you know, should talk about the fact that prior to us going out in the field, you know, some stress management training, or just talking about that team before it hits the field. Talk about what we need to do to support each other as a team. And the responsibility just doesn't lie with the team leader, but with every team member. So we want a brief on the personnel before you go out on response. You know, you should feel comfortable, know where you're going, what your responsibility will be when you're out there. Emphasize teamwork. No one works alone. Encourage breaks when you need them, not only from a physical standpoint. You may do a lot of walking. It could be very hot. It could be raining. You know, there's a lot of reasons why you need to break besides just maybe a mental break. Provide nutrition. Hopefully in your backpack, you've got some granola bars and things like that. Rotate responsibilities. You know, if you're part of a team that's going into a house and someone is staying outside, you know, maybe after you've done that for an hour, that you need to rotate and be the one that stays outside with the radio. Okay. And it's also quite possible to phase out workers gradually. It may be that you go out with a team and you check a geographical zone, and then you come back to your incident command post, and you get put on another team. So which you may not necessarily be search and rescue. We may put you over in logistics or something like that. Every time a team comes back from the field, they need to do a little debrief on how's everybody doing? What did you experience? Try to stay to the facts. How did you feel? You know, what was it like for you? Do you want to go on? So you need, you know, to have some kind of debrief. And if your team leader doesn't bring it up, then you bring it up. So how do we want to go about reducing stress? You know, this almost sounds like something from the Red Cross or the American Heart Association. Get enough sleep, exercise, eat a balanced diet. You know, sometimes that's all hard. It was especially hard during the pandemic to eat a balanced diet because being stuck at home all the time, it was too easy to snack. You know, if you are working, you know, that home work-life balance is very important. You want to allow yourself to receive as well as give. You know, as a CERT member, and especially with an event, you're doing a lot of giving, you know, and you need to also say, okay, you know, it's my time now. Remember that your identity is broader than that of a helper. And what is meant by that is you're out on the field, you've got a green hard hat, green vest, jacket, shirt, what, you know, you got your flashlights, you got your backpack, you're out there helping people. People are going to see you as a helper. Okay, not just a CERT member, but that night and shining armor that's coming to help them, to rescue them, to check on them. So that's what's meant by you've got an identity that's broader than just you as a personal helper. Reducing stress, connecting with others, use spiritual resources. I had some thoughts as I was going over this lesson plan myself. And I thought the best practice to prevent stress is to practice your disaster role. If you have in mind a role that you would like to play during a disaster, I know we've been stymied a little bit in having all kinds of trainings because of the pandemic. Hopefully it won't be too much longer as we look towards the fall. But do some practice. Practice, what you want to do. We see that in the military, law enforcement. They continually practice, so things become second nature. The more practice, the more comfortable you're going to be in performing your assignment. There's one of the things we used to say when I did trainer training for PG&E was practice does not make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. And so when you're going to practice, you should also think about how you're going to do it. How realistic is it? You want to, during an event, especially when you're going out, you want to find out exactly what is expected of you. What are your duties? And that would come from your team lead. Okay. If you're feeling stressed, my recommendation is to do some deep breathing exercises. So, call a timeout. We need to rest. I need to rest. You want to close your eyes, relax your face, very important. Don't clench your teeth together. Leave them separated. It's part of relaxing your face. You want to inhale through your nose. Nice deep breath. Hold your breath for a count of 7. Focus on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale through your mouth. And repeat that. At least 4 breaths. Sometimes people, as they're doing that, will also visualize some place that they're really happy at. It could be at the beach, could be a creek, a river, in the forest. Could be just sitting around with your family. But sometimes that visualization takes you another place while you're doing these deep breathing exercises. And I want to just finish this so I don't sound like I'm lecturing, but remember, acknowledging the need for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. All right, a formal debriefing. So this is one of those things that may not happen. Ideally, after the event's over, you've come back from the field, you have your debrief with your team lead, and hopefully the operations chief would be available to hear that particular debrief because he could learn from that as well. So you want to talk about what you encountered out there. What was it like? Okay. What was your reaction to what you saw? What feelings about the event? Okay. If possible, we want to consider having a mental health professional conduct a critical incident stress debrief. The police department has chaplains. If we could tap one of them, that would be ideal. But the number one thing is we want to get together and talk about it. Okay. So beware that a disaster service worker trauma and stress can follow a disaster work. You want to explain to family members and friends how they can support you. You need to be aware of the fact that they may be feeling some trauma too, okay? So it's kind of a two-way street. Hopefully they can listen to you when you need to talk, understand that you may not want to talk, about something that affected you. But family and friends and just being able to talk, if we think about it now, what do we do now anyway? If you have a best friend out there, if you're not tweeting each other, you're talking, in person or on your cell phone. It's the same thing. It's a way of letting go of things too. Very important. PTSD. So there are 6 criteria, and you can, some of the things that could cause PTSD is horrific, horrible, grotesque, disgusting, or frightening event. You may see things or hear somebody crying out for help like you've never experienced before. You may see things and then over time or afterwards, you're going to be seeing them again. Seeing the face of an injured child floating in a bowl of soup, or hearing a person's voice scream for help, kind of haunting. You may avoid something, avoid places, conversation, people. After we lost our daughter, Amanda, there was a certain part of the house that we avoided for a period of time. And it was just that going there brought back her death or suicide. So that's something to consider. Arousal, having a hard time shutting down after an emergency. When I was going through CERT's Train the Trainer program, one of my fellow students in there was an EMT and reasonably new. And he shared the story of his first day on the job. They were sitting in the ambulance on International Boulevard in Oakland. They got their first call, was just down a couple blocks from where they were. Went lights and sirens and speeding down International Boulevard. And they came across something that affected him greatly. It was 2 mothers that had a in-home daycare, and they were taking the kids somewhere. They were crossing the street. There was a fellow that had stolen a car and took off racing, and he ran into him. And so when he looked out and he saw the children maimed, laying there on the street, the adults, he initially panicked, like he didn't know what to do. And people started yelling at him to help the others. And so he went into this mode of relying on his training. This is that perfect practice makes perfect thing. But he just got into gear working. And a couple of weeks later, one of his friends came to his house and said, something's happened to you. He said, you're not the same. And what happened to him was his way of dealing with this was he was kind of shutting it out by continuing his work mode and not pulling away from that. He's having a hard time shutting it down. So symptoms that can last longer than 30 days, significant disruption in normal life pursuits. So Traumatic stress could affect cognitive functioning, physical health, interpersonal relations, and how you react to people. So the best thing you can do is seek help, even if that's talking. You want to remember too that those around you that have been involved in the event, may have some feelings too. So traumatic crisis is an event in which people experience or witness actual or potential death or injury of others, destruction of homes, neighborhoods, loss of contact with family, close relationships. It's usually at this point I tell a story when I was up at Chico State, and we were leaving to go up to, they finally got their first mall, North Valley Plaza. And we were leaving to go. We went over and got on 99 to go north, and we came upon an accident. The CHP had just gotten there, and in my car, I rolled over something and it went bump. And I stopped over my door and I looked at it, and it was an arm. I almost retched right then, but CHP officer came up, told me I had to keep moving. And so I went back and I processed that accident. I knew the person. I knew the car is what told me I knew the person. I sold shoes to help pay for college. One of my best customers was the wife of the district attorney for Butte County. They were having some marital problems. I always thought women only talked about their problems to their beautician, but anyhow, they occasionally do to their shoe salesman, and she was a good customer. And as it turned out, what I read in the paper was that she just wanted to end it and got into her Cadillac and revved it up. They estimate about 100 miles an hour and drove into over a crossing embankment. So, it was terrible, but it haunted me for quite a while. Managing a death scene. So before I get into, especially that first bullet, move a body, if we're out in the field as part of a search and rescue team and we come across a deceased person, we've done our RPM, we said, okay, non-salvageable. We could cover the person, certainly. We're not going to move them. We're going to try to minimize touching them. What you need to do is your group needs to get back in touch with your incident command post that can relay the information to the emergency operations center at the police department or city hall, depending on where it's going to be, and let them know that you've come across a deceased person. You can't really pronounce them dead. That's not our job. We don't know what happens. We're not the authority to be able to do that. So even though we may want to say deceased, they're unsalvageable. That sounds so terrible to say, but we just need to leave them and radio in. Now, if you're working in medical, and let's say you have somebody who came in as a yellow, doesn't need to go to the hospital or something, but we're going to observe them for a while. They're bandaged up with some cuts. It looks like the bleeding stopped. And then they go into shock. And it comes on rather quickly, and they may pass away. If they're with us at the ICP and medical, then we're going to move them to another tent with enclosed sides, which will be our temporary morgue. Once again, we'll get on the radio. The head of the medical section, okay, will get in touch with operations Operations will inform the incident commander and the ham radio operator to contact the EOC. We want to cover the body, treat them with respect. If in fact we have contact with a family member, the transport form had some information on it. If we contact a family member, we want to have just one person come and look and identify the person. Family members may show up. We should allow them to have some time with the deceased. It may get a little awkward if we have more than one deceased in this 10 by 10 tent, but we need to let them grieve. So in informing the family, you know, if they're all there, and let's say they show up and they said, we don't know where Aunt Millie is. So what you want to do is verify that this is the family. Then you would, again, going back, you have one person there that will go and identify the body. If in fact it is, if we can have the people sit down so they don't, you know, faint or something like that, we want to. You want to make eye contact, and we got to let them know that the person has deceased. We can tell the family that, I'm sorry, but your family member has died. I'm so very sorry. That's all you really need to say. Okay, it's going to be a very emotional time. No one wants to say those words. So with that, in summary, we talked a little bit about disaster psychology, caring for yourself, your buddy, and the survivors. That's what it's all about, you know, because that's safety. So now I'm going to ask for questions, and we'll see how many questions we get. Okay, not seeing any questions, then I'm going to turn this back over to Jim Bonato. Next week, we'll be going over the incident command system and how it operates within CERT. That's actually going to be kind of fun. So thank you for your time. Jim, you're muted.
Thank you, Gordon. Getting used to these things. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and we will be posting this video up on the Pleasant Hill CERT website shortly. So look for, it probably should be up there in a couple days. I want to thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday for our final CERT refresher presentation. As Gordon mentioned, it's going to be on CERT organization. So once again, thank you, Gordon, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Okay, Gordon, you can stop the recording.
Oh, yes, thank you.